Today we're going to be discussing PDM templates, so best practices for building SOLIDWORKS PDM templates. And for those who aren't familiar with them, I do want to point out that the PDM templates are only part of SOLIDWORKS PDM Professional. They are not part of the PDM standard. So if you are looking for templates of some sort that are for PDM standard, this functionality that we're going to be talking about today is only in the PDM Professional option. With that, as Josh said, my name is Lucas Gierach. I am a senior PLM consultant here with Inflow, which is one of the divisions of CATI. And today we're going to be talking about those templates, and specifically I have a few takeaways that I'm hoping you guys will remember. If you remember nothing else from this presentation, hopefully these three things will stand out to each of you. The first is that folder and file templates drive consistency. What I mean by this is that they are going to help drive consistency in the folder structures that you create. They're going to help with making sure that permissions are what they should be for creating folders, where they should be created, making sure that the proper properties are added into those folders, etc. The second is talking about simplicity and how that improves the efficiency. And when I'm saying simplicity, I'm referring to the simplicity for the end user, the engineer, not necessarily the administrator. The goal of you as an administrator is to set up templates in order to make your work for the engineer more simplistic and quick and consistent. Third is specifically for you as the administrator, and that is knowing where your variables are mapped. This is incredibly important when it comes to templates, specifically because the PDM templates, they have their own set of variables that we're going to talk about. And when you rename variables in PDM or in the template, or you delete them, it can have repercussions for your templates. So knowing where they're mapped and keeping track of that in your notes will be very helpful. So jumping into these and going through them. Before we do that, just a little bit of my background. As I said, I am a senior consultant here. I focus exclusively on PDM. I've been with Inflow for about 3 years now. But my background is about 9 years as a PDM administrator for a company, and with some overlap, about 12 years as a design engineer as well. So hopefully you're going to see in here what I tried to bring to this presentation of some experiences that I've had and what I've learned at Inflow with other resources here of best practices when building your templates. For those who are unfamiliar with the template wizard inside of PDM, I'm going to go through each of these screens in a little bit here as we get into it, but just a quick overview. Inside of your administration tool, there is a node called templates. When you right-click on it, you'll see an option for new template. Inside of that, it will open up a wizard, and inside of that wizard are several different steps. The first one being giving a name to your template. That name is what will show up when you right-click inside of the vault. Next screen is where we determine permissions that the template's going to use when it runs. We'll talk about this because that is part of one of my best practices that I'm going to recommend to you. But again, it's what permissions it uses to run. Next is what input card. So one of the things we have the ability to do, and I will recommend doing, is using input cards to gather information from the engineer to run the template and fill out information. Next would be setting up your file and folder structures that you want. Again, this wizard and this tool is ideal and intended for creating new file and folder structures with some level of automation. Next is choosing an icon that it's going to display in that right-click menu for the end user. And lastly is determining what groups or users are allowed to see that right-click option when they right-click in the vault. So jumping into things, let's start with a real simple one here, and that is creating a folder template for just a real simple folder structure. This one would create a single folder with another nested folder inside of it called documentation, specifically in a library directory. I mentioned folder and file templates drive consistency. One of the ways that you can use this is by denying the permission in your groups for adding folders. so that the users don't have permission to right-click and create folders at will, which if you have any network locations, you've probably seen how quickly that folder structure can get out of hand and how rapidly it can devolve from anything that makes any sense, where you're hunting and pecking, trying to figure out where people save things and why this folder structure was created, etc. If we deny the ability to simply right-click and add folders wherever and whenever they want, we can then set it up so that a template is their way to create folder structures, having more consistency within our vault of that folder structure. The way we do that is by making sure that the template runs with admin permissions and that the users don't have the ability to right-click and add folders, and then we set up where and when they are allowed to create folders using a template. So if we take a look at this example, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my vault and let's show what this would do and look like. So here you see my admin tool. I'm going to go ahead and go right to my vault and we're going to show this. You'll see here I have a libraries folder. I have a projects folder inside my libraries. I only have 2 template files. No matter where I click in the vault, I have right-click new, and I have some templates that I've created we're going to walk through. The first one, creating a library folder. This is that real simple, basic one I thought we'd start with for those who are unfamiliar with a template at all. And I'm going to start by creating a quick folder. You'll notice that I like to have fun with my demonstrations, so I am using a little bit of fun in the company names and the folder names that we're going to use. So I'm filling in some information here. Again, this is what I'm asking for from the end user, and this could be whatever you want it to be, but it's a real basic input card where the user fills in some information. When they click OK, it's hard-coded to do whatever we set it for, wherever it's putting folders. In this case, in the libraries directory, it created a folder called Artificial Intelligence. It copied my part type, my manufacturer, into the folder properties of that folder, and inside of there added a documentation folder. Again, making it the only way that users can add folders into the libraries directory. If they right-click and go to new, you'll see there is no new folder option. Their only options are these templates. In order to give them a place to save their files, we have some of those other templates, and we'll go through those. So if I switch back over here, one of the other things that we get with an input card is that consistency, but also an easy, familiar method for the user to know what you're asking for. So it's a form-based information. Ideally, you want this input card to be very similar to the folder data card that they're already used to seeing, so that they know what you're looking for and they don't have to use any deductive reasoning to guess at what you're asking for in this input card. It should have similar terminology, similar layout to what they're used to seeing on their folder cards. Another way that we can take advantage of input cards is by using input formulas. If you've never done an input formula before, we're going to talk about it briefly here, but there's also some great articles on our blog. If you hop out to our Inflow blog, I'll put up that link later on in the presentation. Again, the input cards, they help drive that consistency of the folders, what the naming is of them, and improving the simplicity for the end user. If you look here at this example, the way I'm using the input formulas is that the user is inputting only a module number and a description of that module, and the input formula is deriving from that a module name and a name for their new subassembly, copying in the project number and the project year from the folder that this module would be in. Before we get too far into these, we need to discuss the differences of variables. So I've talked briefly about how important it is to know where your variables are mapped. Well, when we're working with templates, we do have to map our variables. Specifically, we need to control what we're copying and where we're copying it. When we use an input card, those values that are entered there are not automatically stored anywhere. If you enter something into, say, a file data card or a folder data card in your vault, those values get stored inside a SQL. But on a template input card, those values are not stored anywhere unless we tell the system to store them somewhere, and we store those inside of a template variable, which could be looked at as a temporary variable or a runtime variable. It only exists while this template is being run. So what we're going to do is take those values from the input card, we're going to copy them to a template variable, and then if we want to place them on the folder properties of the new folders being created, we need to copy them from the template variable to the new folders or files. What this looks like as far as copying over is an example right here where we look at that third section of our template wizard, which we're going to go through live here in just a moment. You'll see that we have some card variables in our list on the left. If I get my cursor here, we have our card variables that got brought in from our input card. And on the right are some template variables that I've mapped these to. For example, assembly number mapped over to this template variable of T_assembly number. You'll see that two of these are not being copied at all. Those are the two for module number and description. Because the way I've set these up, these two values drive the module name and the module assembly number, which are the two values that I actually want. These are simply what are being used to create those semi-intelligent numbers. So let's take a look at what this looks like in practice. We'll come back to our Vault here in our administration tool, and if we come down to the templates node, let's take a look at the Create New Project. I'm going to double click on it to open that up, and let's walk through it. The first screen, template name. As I said, this is what will show up in that right-click menu. You can nest this in a secondary flyout if wanted, so I could put in the word projects and a backslash. That backslash tells the system to make this another flyout. So the right-click would be right-click, you'd see new, you'd go to new and you'd see projects, go to projects, and then you'd see create new project. For the most part, I would recommend going against using that because it's a lot of flyouts for the user to have to follow with their cursor that can sometimes be challenging. However, if you have a large number of templates, 20, 30 plus templates, it can really be helpful to group them by type for you as the administrator. Even if your end user only sees 2 or 3, it would be nice for you to be able to have them in groups in order to manage those more effectively. If it's going to be less than that, I'd say don't have extra flyouts because it will just be additional work for the end user to follow it with their cursor. If we go to the next screen, this is where I mentioned we set up the permissions of how this will run. My best practice, my recommendation to you is to run it with the admin user or another user set up with administrative privileges in the Vault. The reason for this is because this user has permissions to add folders, but we're denying it to the groups or the individual users. But we want to make sure the template can run, and this user would have the permissions to run it. You'll see that in my example here, this password is blank, just to point out why. That's because this is a demo Vault, and I don't have a password set up for it. Please do not do that in a production environment. Make sure you have a decent password on there. I do want to point out also, if you change the admin password or whatever user you had set up for running your templates, if you change that password, you will need to edit each one of your templates and update the password with the new one, or it will fail to run. It is not linked to any other place, so it will need to be re-entered. The next screen is where I've selected an input card, and with that it brought in all the variables that are on that input card, and I have the ability to then copy them to template variables. If I drag this up here a little bit so we can see, you'll see that there are 2 that are not copied. Coming down here to template variables, I need to copy those over. So you'll see project name and description are not copied. I want to create ones for that, but you'll see the rest of them in here, things like our assembly number, and 2 that are not being copied from the card, but I'm going to be using, and they're pulling a serial number. So I've got one for the year and one for a project number, serial number. When we create a new variable, first thing is to give it a name. Another recommendation as a best practice is to name your template variables with something that designates them separate from the PDM variables, your card variables. The reason for designating them separate is to keep them clear within your mind so that when you're looking at them being mapped around in the template, you don't get confused and maybe forget to map one, etc. Having something like T_ helps to differentiate them for you. So T underscore, I need one for project name. And for type, we have a couple different options here. Format string is what we want to use when it is pulling from an input card. If you're just getting into templates and you want to test it out and just do a little bit of poking around before you create an input card, use the prompt the user option. What that'll do is put in whatever the prompt you type in here. It'll place that as a pop-up that will show up for the user with whatever question you typed in, and their value would then get stored in whatever you named that template variable. It's a quick, easy way to have it get information from the user without creating an input card. Again, best for if you're just starting out. Most of your templates that are going to have more than a couple values, I highly encourage using a template card. Again, it keeps things consistent, keeps the interface familiar for the user, allows you to have more control over the names and information provided. So we're going to go with format string because, again, I want it to pull from that input card. The text string down below is pretty much irrelevant. It is not going to read this in. You don't have to delete this out. I delete it out just to keep everything simple and clear and concise. But this would be essentially ignored when it's a format string. Create one more for our T underscore project description. Again, set it to format string. And I'm going to clear that again just for clarity in my template variables and organizing them. So now that I've created those template variables, again, I have to map things. So my card variable of project name, I want to map to my template variable project name. I do want to point out that you have to click on the actual drop-down arrow itself. Clicking anywhere else will not bring up that drop-down. We'll go ahead and map project description as well. So now I've done the first part. I've copied from my card. So whatever the user enters in is being copied to my template variables. Now I can utilize those in the creation of my folder and file structures, as well as copy them to the properties, the data cards for those folders or files. Which is the very next screen where I set up that structure. If we look at the first level here, you'll notice that whatever I select, it has that little green arrow on it, letting me know that that is the folder I am using for any files I would add. So whatever folder is selected, if I click here to add new files, which we'll do later on, it would place them in that folder. I bring that up because unlike folders, files cannot be dragged and dropped to change orientation where they're located. It's whatever folder you selected is where it's going to go. Up above here, we have two options for adding new folders. One is to add a root level folder. That is this yellow icon. The next one is to add a subfolder or a nested folder. If we do a new root level folder, which is what this is, it asks you for a name, and when you click off of it, it will show you the full name of your vault along with that new folder name at the root level. If I expand that, you'll see I've already created a little bit of a folder structure in here. I need to create one more level. I want to have the year, which you'll see this is the name of that template variable enclosed in percent signs. Anytime we want to use the value of a template variable in, say, a folder name or a file name, we can enclose it in percent signs, and it will use whatever value is in there for that folder name. I'm going to create one more at the root level here and use those percent signs as well for T underscore, let's see, what do I want? I want this one to be, let me remember my notes here. This is my project number. So again, enclosing it in percent signs, clicking off of it or hitting enter, either one is fine. And I mentioned you can drag and drop for folders, not for files. So if I drag and drop, say, engmech into here, it reorients it. If I drag and drop project number onto year, we get those nested in the way I want. So what will happen is it'll create a projects folder. If it doesn't exist, it creates it. If it already exists, it reuses it. And same for the year, which this is a 4-digit year counter is what I set up. And then this serial number, then creating an engmech, customer info, and vendor folders. Now, one of the things we want to do is, as I mentioned, copy the template variable to the properties of this folder. That is done by right-clicking on the folder and going to properties. Inside of here, we have a couple different tabs of information. The first one is group rights. Now, for those of you who are familiar with being an administrator of PDM, know that you have folder permissions you can set up for groups and users. And I'm going to tell you that as a best practice, you want to set up your folder permissions at a root levels of folders and not use this option right here as a general rule. There are scenarios where you might want to. However, as an admin, it can add a lot of headache later on to manage. But what you have is the ability to do explicit rights. And what this would do is whatever rights we set up in here, it will copy these rights of this new folder into the folder permissions of that group. Every time this template is run, you would get a new folder with new explicit folder rights added to the folder permissions of that group. Again, that can become a headache if this is a template that's run often. So in general, leave it to rights from the parent folder. Don't have it being explicit ones for the groups. If we come over to users, you should be familiar with the knowledge that it is better to set your permissions at groups than individual users. It is much easier to maintain that at a group level where you can add and remove new users and old users rather than trying to set those up per individual. The area that I'm interested in, though, is copying these variables. I said we've got copied from the input card to a template variable, and now that they're in a template variable, I want to copy them to this new folder. The only one I want to copy to the year folder is the year value. We'll hit OK, and I'm going to come down here to project number, do the same thing. And on this one, I want to copy all the rest. So I want to copy customer name to customer name. I want to copy project engineer and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and set all those up. I'm not worried about year because it'll inherit that from the parent folder. But I do want to grab the rest. So now I've got those copied from the template variable over to the new folder data card variable. We'll click OK. That's set up for this folder. And now I can move on to the next section in this template wizard. Let's drag this back down a little bit. And that is choosing an icon. Again, this is the icon that will show up in the right-click menu. The list of available icons is determined by the extensions on the computer you're on, not the server, but whatever computer you're on when you're accessing the administration tool. Whether or not this icon displays for the engineer will be determined based on whether or not they have the extension you chose on their machine along with its icon. So if you chose one they don't have, it will simply show up blank. CVS being the administration tool card Blueberry. Fairly common one, easy to use. Next is choosing who's allowed to see this in the right-click menu and utilize it. We're going to go ahead and allow administrators, CAD approvers, and my admin user. Click OK, and let's go ahead and test this out and see how it runs. So I'm going to right-click, New, Create New Project, and we're going to input some information. So I need to choose a project engineer. I need to give it a project name. I need to choose a customer. As you can probably see, I thought I'd have a little bit of fun with this, so it's a little random slash, my mind. And for a manufacturing process, obviously has to be laser. And we'll click OK. Again, it's going to reuse our projects directory. I already have the year in here because I created some previous projects. So when I go in there, it created my new project number. And you can see it copied all those values that I input into the data card for this folder. Inside of that folder, I have my EngMech, and inside of there, my customer info and vendor. Let's take a look at our new module template. Before we do, let's take a look specifically at the template card for it and show the input formula for those who aren't familiar with that. So if I drag this over, you'll see that my module number and module description are the only two values that I'm asking of the end user, the engineer, and therefore they are not marked read-only. However, module name on down to project year are set as read-only, and module name and assembly number happen to be an input formula. You can see that down here, where it's utilizing other variables to help fill in the value. Project number is pulling from the folder card of where I right-click and placing that in there. Same for the year. So real basic input card, again, it has to be saved as a template card. So when you're creating your cards, make sure you save it as the right type, and then we can use it inside of our template. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So we'll go to our create new module. Very similar to our other one, we have a menu string. It's not nested. We're running our permissions from the admin user to make sure it has permissions to create the folders. And then we have our input card, copying those card variables over to template variables, with two of these not being copied because I don't need them after they are used to create the module name and assembly number. If we click on the template variable, you'll see that I also have one in here that is not being used. If I go over, you'll see module category is not in this list. It was one that I created. I thought I was going to use it and then decided not to. And here's where we talk about when it's really important to know where your variables are being mapped. If you rename a template variable or a PDM card variable, if you rename them or delete them and they have any mapping going on, any copying going on, it will break your template. So I'm going to go ahead and just rename this one by adding a letter or a number to it. Click OK. And now to show you where that's broken, we'll go to the next screen where our folders are being created and take a look at the module name folder where that value was copied. You'll see here I have an error. Source value variable not found. It's looking for the original name because the original name was copied to a card. It found my new one I created as well and listed that separate. But since they're not linked, they're separate once copied, this one isn't copied anywhere. This one is failing. The only way to fix this is to back up and rename it back to what it was. So we'll get rid of the 2. We'll click OK, go to the module name properties, go to copy variables. You'll see that my error is gone and it has that copy back again. And if I want to actually remove this or rename it, I need to first remove the copy. So I need to tell it to be not copied. Click OK. If it was copied back at my input card, if it was copied here, I'd also have to come here and choose not copied as well. Then I can come in here and remove it or rename it. So I'll go ahead and remove it, hit OK. Go back to here, you'll see that since it's removed, it wasn't copied, it's removed, and it's no longer throwing an error. I think that's everything I need to set up here. My icon, my user groups, all have permissions. We'll click OK and let's run this template. And you'll notice that I had a warning on it. When I go to create new module, I had a note up here. You must be in the project folder engmech, this folder right here. Technically, it'll work if I do it in the project itself, but wanted to be specific. And all I'm asking for from the end user are 2 pieces of information. Things like what module they're working on, which may not be in order, hence giving them that option rather than hard coding it to a counter. It might be different people assigned to different module numbers, and they might be starting in different orders. And then what is the description of that module? It builds my name and assembly number that they can then use for their subassembly name. And this is going to create folders for those engineers to then use to save their files. So the error that you see, I see the question in the chat as far as what error does it show if you remove it rather than rename? The error is the exact same. The error doesn't change whether it's renamed or removed. It just sees the value is missing. And so it throws that error, and you would need to re-add that template variable exactly as it's looking for. If I go ahead and refresh my folder here, you'll see that it added my Unit 1 system. And if I click on it, it has my assembly number, subassembly name copied into the folder properties, and inside of here is where they can then start saving their assemblies. So we talked about the template variables. We talked about needing to copy those to the folder itself and how important it is to know where those variables are being mapped. Some of the do's and don'ts of template variables: make sure that you have a different name just to keep it clear in your mind. That clarity is really important, especially when you're working with so many different variables and different templates, etc. Do make sure to map them from your input card to a template variable, and then from a template variable to a folder or file property data card if you are going to use it on them. Do not remove or rename your variables without first removing any of those links. Otherwise, it will break your template and it will stop working for the end user. Talking about file templates, we've talked extensively about folders here. Let's talk about file templates. We mentioned how they drive consistency. Well, one of the ways you can use it is with the right click for creating new files, whether that be an EC document or perhaps a SOLIDWORKS document. So we're going to go through what that looks like. When you're adding a file template versus a new folder, you get a different menu asking you for some different information, including what to name the new file, and then what values to copy from the template variables to the new file card, and a few other checkboxes that we're going to hit up as well. Let's go ahead and hop into that. For this one, I'm also using an input card. So we'll come over here to New EC, open it up. You'll see I've got just a menu string that's New EC, running it as admin again. I have an input card with 3 variables on it. Drag this up a little bit here, and some template variables. If we take a look at those real quick, you'll see I have one for a year. And again, this is pulling from wherever I right click. Project number is going to be a special one, which we're going to take a look at in just a moment. And then I have a serial number for the ECN number and design engineer, which the user is going to put in on that input card. We go to next. Instead of placing it in the current folder, and the current folder is defined as wherever you right click, I'm having it hard code into projects, into the year, which is based off of what year folder I right click in, and project number is the special one. So project number is a special value that I have set up. And I'm going to go ahead and just cancel out of here real quick and show you what that's pulling from. So if you haven't done this before, one of your options for a card list is to link it to a SQL database. I have in here a very simple little SQL query, and I'm just going to refresh the time and resave here just to make sure that it's with my latest folder I added, and go ahead and hit test. And you'll see what it's pulling is everything that has a value for project number, which are my folders. And so these are the project number folders that I've created, and it's pulling that information from SQL, in theory, live, updating every minute, so that when I create my EC, it uses that project number that I'm choosing in the input card to determine which folder to look for an EngMech folder to then place my new file. If I double click on the file here, I get to the template file where I can control what the source is. The source is inside of my vault. I highly encourage that. And what the file name is going to be of the new document. Make sure you don't delete the extension, or it will be an extensionless file in your vault that it won't know what to do with or what data card to show, and therefore properties won't copy. But I'm using % and then a template variable to name this using that serial number. On the right, I've copied design engineer from the template to the card. I want to copy the ECN number from the template variable to the card variable. Project number, I'm not worried about year. We have some checkbox options. One of those is to show the file data card. If you were to use this without an input card, you might want to have it show the file data card so they could enter that information right away into the data card. Whichever way is easier. If you don't need all the information from the data card, but you want to make sure you capture specific things, that's when I would use the input card like I have. I've got a couple of values, the design engineer, the project number, that are important to me, but not necessarily all the values that might be available on the data card. There's also some other options within here. Disabling standard serial number generation. This disables any serial numbers that might be on the file data card itself. So if you're running a serial number here and you have a file card that runs a serial number, this will make sure it doesn't run the one on the data card. It'll only run whatever you have in here in your template variables. And lastly, if you wanted to check in right away, you can with a note. I'm going to go ahead and click OK for that, and we'll go to the next screen. I'm using a different icon because this is an Excel file. I went ahead and chose my Excel icon. For users and groups, I've got those permissions. We'll click OK and see how this runs. Again, I have it set up so that you don't need to be in a specific folder other than a specific year. Right-click New, New EC, and you'll see it ask me for the information that I thought was important to include, and then choose which project you're doing an EC for. I'm going to go ahead and choose that most recent one I created, that 1007. Click OK. Once that completes, if I go into that folder, go into EngMet, because that's where we had it bury it, you'll see my EC document. It copied my ECN number, my design engineer, project number, into the data card for it. And one of the things I love about Excel is that if I open this up, Excel gives you a very nice way to map values from your data card to the Excel table itself. So you'll see that these have auto-filled in. The way this is done, well, we'll ignore the sign in for the moment. The way this is done is by naming the cell. So here's the name box for that cell. I've named it ECN number. And then I went to the info of it. Advanced, apparently you have to be signed in. Well, bear with me. Oh, and I have to enter a code. Amazing how this doesn't always work perfect. Everything was great this morning, and now I have to re-enter.
Don't worry, Lucas. Right. I have had Microsoft verifications all day long, so I think it's everybody today, not just you.
Well, maybe that's what it is. All right, so we reopened it with re-signed in, and we go in here to info, go to advanced properties, which now it lets me get to, and custom. Here's where we can link content. So if I look at ECN number, you'll see that my source ECN number is being linked to my named cell of ECN number. I've added that in here, and that's what tells it to basically put that in as a custom property that can then be read by PDM. So if I go back to my document, that's how I link it. The benefit of Excel is Excel automatically updates with this information. If we take a look at a Word document, which I have one here, I'm simply going to copy that somewhere else into my vault to show this example. Word has some serious limitations. If I go ahead and enter some values in here and save those values and open up this Word document, what you're going to see is that it doesn't update right away. Notice how these are not updated. In Word, the way this is done, if I highlight everything, you'll see that these are a little darker. These are fields that I've added in. And with Word, you have to either add a macro that updates all fields, or you have to select everything or individually and choose Update Field. Once you do that, it rereads that information. The problem with this is that unless you can verify that everyone runs the update field before doing any printing or gathering information off of there, it is subject to being potentially wrong. And so I greatly discourage using that because it could be very untrustworthy. I see the question in the chat about Excel pushing values back into PDM. Yes, it can. So if I change that property in Excel, it will change it in my data card. All right, let me go back here to our PowerPoint and just reiterate our takeaways here. Again, paying attention to your templates and setting those up allow you to have that folder and file consistency, allows you to have control over what folder structures are being created, where they're being created, where users are allowed to put folders, to add files into those folders, etc. Simplicity improves efficiency for your engineers. If you can make those input cards super simplistic so that it requires little input and little understanding, there'll be less training required. It'll be easier for new users to be able to get up to speed within your company and the standards that you guys try to follow. And then how important it is to know where your variables are being mapped, keep track of that, follow it, and make sure that if you're going to change any variables or you're going to rename them, delete them, that you know where they're mapped so you can go in and unlink those and not break any of your templates unintentionally. Next steps for you guys. So if you're new to templates especially, go and take and create a template, just something for a basic new folder, try it out, utilize the input cards, create an input card, set up some template variables, and play around with the templates. Just give the permissions to your user, whether that's the admin or your own personal login if you're part of the administrator group, and start trying them out. Try a few things. Also, feel free to visit our blog. We've got some great information out there as far as templates, using input formulas, things of that nature that will really help you on your journey. All right, any other questions in the chat that I missed, Josh? Or anyone have any questions you want to throw in the chat and we'll try and address them?
There was one earlier on here, Lucas, that we did have. It was a question about having to create individual passwords for each template, and if that was something that you could possibly control through Credentials Manager.
There is not a way at this time. So if I go back to here and we take a look at one of the templates real quick, if you're reading the permissions from the logged in user, which again means that you would have to give them permissions to do everything this template is trying to do, and that kind of eliminates some of the value. But otherwise, if you're doing from the following user, there is no way to link this at this time to a credential manager that I'm aware of. I would encourage you guys, because this is something I've asked for and other people have asked for, is a way to have this update automatically behind the scenes when you're logged into the admin tool, submitted as an enhancement request. I would request you to do that, because it's through that we end up getting things like this altered and fixed. Was there any other questions I missed?
No, that was the only question that we had in there.
Any other questions you guys have? Feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them. I see another one. Advantage. Let's see here. Are there advantages or disadvantages of using serial numbers generated at the template versus at the data card? So I would say that the advantage of using it in the template is that you can use it to drive the file name itself. And if it's only on the data card, it wouldn't be possible to drive the file name, because it would only read the serial number upon creation of it if it's on the file card. Whereas when we do it in the template, it actually pulls that number before it creates any folders or files, and therefore it can use that value to name them. So that would be the benefit or advantage of using it in the template itself versus on the data card. Limitations, they're very similar to what I just stated. The pros are often also the limitations. If you're trying to create a file and you only want it in the data card itself, it's a lot simpler to just do it on the data card, not even mess with it in the template, so you don't have to worry about it. The PowerPoint presentation available afterward. Josh, can you answer that question?
I know we will put the recording out there, Lucas, for sure. We sometimes do put a PDF version of the presentation out there as well. I will have to double check with the marketing group to make sure. But at a minimum, we will have the recording out there for everybody. All right. Well, once again, thank you everybody for taking the time to come out today. Thank you, Lucas, for putting on a great presentation here. We got some good comments coming through and stuff. And really appreciate everybody taking the time, and hope everybody has an enjoyable rest of the day and stay safe out there.